The private dining room at Alinea was a soft, glowing bubble of quiet elegance. It was my world, the one I had built for myself. Brick by expensive brick. Outside, Seattle was a blur of rain and headlights. But in here, there was only the gentle clink of silverware on porcelain and the warm hum of conversation. The candlelight danced across the faces of my friends. People who saw me for who I was, not who my family wanted me to be. For the first time in a long time, I felt the tight knot in my chest begin to loosen. I was Lauren. I was 34. And for one night, I thought I could be happy. If this story touches you, please subscribe to the channel and share the video to help me keep growing. My dress was a statement. A cream silk gown that fell to the floor in a whisper. The kind of piece you save for a moment you want to remember. It felt like a second skin. A suit of armor made of light. It shimmered under the delicate crystal chandeliers. A beacon of the life I had carved out of sheer will. I had imagined this night for months. My mother, Linda, would see the respect I commanded from my colleagues. My older sister, Brittany, would see that my success wasn't a fluke. My niece, Kayla, would see an example of a woman who stood on her own 2 feet. This dinner was meant to be a bridge, a beautifully catered, champagne-fueled offering of peace. I smiled at my friend Jenna across the table as she raised her glass. To Lauren, she said, her voice warm and genuine. The hardest-working woman I know. Happy birthday. If you knowed... A chorus of agreement went around the table. I felt a blush creep up my neck. A pleasant warmth of recognition that was so foreign in the context of my own family. I looked toward them, seated together at the end of the long mahogany table. My mother offered a tight, polite smile. Kayla was looking down, the blue light of her phone illuminating her bored expression. And Brittany was watching me with an expression I knew all too well. It was a mixture of resentment and disdain, a look that could curdle milk. She had barely spoken a word all evening, communicating only through heavy sighs and pointed eye rolls at the decor, the menu, and the conversation. The main course had been cleared, leaving behind the beautiful wreckage of a perfect meal. My plate was nearly clean, but Brittany's was a mess of steak gristle, a smeared dollop of béarnaise sauce, and a wilted sprig of parsley. She had pushed her food around, eating little, as if the act of enjoying something I had provided was a concession she was unwilling to make. I was about to signal the waiter for the cake when Brittany stood up. The movement was abrupt, jarring the quiet atmosphere. She picked up her heavy ceramic plate. For a wild, hopeful second, I thought she was going to carry it away. A strange but helpful gesture. She took 2 steps toward me. Her eyes were locked on mine, glittering with a cold fire I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. The room fell silent. My friends watched, their smiles frozen on their faces. sensing the shift in the air. "You know, Lauren," Brittany said, her voice loud in the sudden hush. "You try so hard. All this. Oh." She gestured vaguely at the room. "The chandeliers. My friends? It's all just a show." 3. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, my hands clasped in my lap, the silk of my gown cool against my skin. I could feel my mother's gaze on me, pleading, willing me to make this easy, to absorb the blow as I always did. Brittany leaned forward, her movement a slow, deliberate insult. She tilted her plate. The remains of her dinner, a half-chewed piece of steak, greasy sauce, a crumpled sauce-stained napkin, and a squeezed lemon rind slid off the plate and landed directly in my lap. It was a wet, heavy mess. The dark brown steak sauce immediately began to bleed into the cream silk, a grotesque flower blooming in real time. The cold lemon rind felt like a dead thing against my leg. I didn't flinch. I just watched the stain spread, a physical manifestation of the ugliness she carried inside her. Then she delivered the final blow. She placed her empty plate back on the table with a sharp crack and looked down at the garbage she'd dumped on me. A cruel, triumphant smile twisted her lips. "Now you look like a garbage can," she sneered. The words hung in the air, thick and vile. She expected laughter. She expected her audience of my friends and colleagues to see the joke, to see me taken down a peg. But the laughter never came. There was only a profound, shocked silence. The only sound was the slow, steady collapse of the illusion I had clung to for 34 years, the foolish, desperate belief that if I just tried hard enough, if I was just successful enough, good enough, generous enough, my family would finally one day respect me. In the wreckage of my birthday dinner, with steak sauce soaking into my heart, I knew that day would never come. That silence in the restaurant was new, but the dynamic that created it was as old as I was. In the ecosystem of our small family, everyone had a role. My mother, Linda, was the weary matriarch, forever sighing about the burdens she had to bear. My sister Brittany, 3 years my senior, was the chaos child, the beautiful, unpredictable storm that drew all the light and energy in the room. And I was the foundation, the steady, reliable, invisible ground they all stood on. Brittany could do no wrong because nothing was ever truly expected of her. She dropped out of community college after one semester to find herself, a journey that seemed to exclusively involve sleeping late and dating men who owned motorcycles. She drifted from one low-wage job to another: waitress, receptionist, dog walker, quitting each one with a dramatic flair. Always the victim of a tyrannical boss or petty workplace drama. Each failure was met with my mother's fierce defense. "The world is just too harsh for a sensitive soul like Brittany," she would say, stroking my sister's hair as if she were a child who'd scraped her knee. Brittany's big heart was the justification for everything. Her inability to hold a job, her constant need for money, her casual cruelty. It was a heart so big, apparently, that it left no room for responsibility. My life was the complete opposite. I was the quiet one, the good student, the one who did her homework without being asked. I collected scholarships like other kids collected trading cards. I worked my way through the University of Washington, then got my MBA at night while holding down a full-time job. I climbed the corporate ladder in Seattle's booming tech industry. Not with a big heart, but with grit and 60-hour work weeks. I bought a condo with a view of the Puget Sound. I built a life my parents could never have imagined for themselves, and they barely noticed. Each milestone I reached was met with a polite but dismissive nod. When I called my mom, giddy with the news of my first big promotion, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh, that's nice, honey," she'd said, her voice distant. "That's really nice. But listen, I have to tell you what happened with Brittany. Her landlord is being an absolute monster. She might be evicted. And just like that, my achievement was swept aside to make room for the latest chapter in the endless drama of Brittany. The conversation became about how I could help, whether I could lend her the money for rent. Again. It was a pattern I knew by heart. My successes were treated like inconvenient blips, strange anomalies that distracted from the family's main project, managing Brittany. When I bought my first car with my own money, my mother's only comment was, "Are you sure you need something so flashy? Lauren, Brittany's old car is barely running." I have. When I told them about a bonus I'd received the reward for landing a massive account for my firm, my mother sighed and said the one line that always felt like a slap in the face. "Money isn't everything, dear. Just deposit now." It was her favorite refrain, a moral shield she used to deflect any evidence of my competence. It was a way of saying, "Your accomplishments are cold and meaningless. Brittany's failures are warm and human. Therefore, Brittany is better." My sister's smallest victories were celebrated with the fanfare of a national holiday. The time she managed to keep a receptionist job for a full 3 months. My mother threw a small party. When she made a lumpy clay pot in a pottery class she attended for a week, it was displayed on the mantelpiece like a priceless artifact. My degrees were in a box in my closet. For years, I told myself their blindness didn't matter. I told myself I was doing well for me, not for them. But it was a lie. A part of me, the small child still living inside the successful 3-4-year-old woman, was desperate for their approval. And so, I kept trying to earn it the only way I knew how, by being useful. It started small. I'd cover Brittany's phone bill one month, buy her groceries the next. Then came her daughter, Kayla. I loved my niece. But from the moment she was born, she became another tool of leverage. "Kayla needs new shoes," my mom would hint. "Brittany's struggling so much." Okay. So I bought the shoes. Then it was dance lessons, school supplies, a new winter coat. When Brittany needed a car to drive Kayla to school, it was I who co-signed the loan. When her credit was too shot to get a lease, it was my name that went on the apartment application. The requests escalated, blurring from needs into wants. "Brittany is just so stressed. Lauren. A spa day would do her a world of good." "Oh. Kayla's friends all have the new iPhone." "Does not." Each time I gave in, I transferred the money. I paid the bill. I said yes. Every transaction was a quiet, desperate plea. "If I solve this problem, will you love me now? If I make your lives easier, will you finally see me?" But it wasn't generosity anymore, and it hadn't been for a long time. It was appeasement. It was like paying a tax for existing in my own family. I was paying them to keep the peace, to prevent the dramatic phone calls, the guilt trips, the heavy, disappointed sighs from my mother. I was funding their dysfunction to buy myself moments of quiet. The problem was the price kept going up, and the peace never lasted. It was a fragile truce, always just one manufactured crisis away from shattering. And I was the one left sweeping up the pieces, writing another check, and pretending it was an act of love instead of what it really was, a desperate attempt to shore up a foundation that had been rotten from the start. This birthday, my 34th, was supposed to be different. I planned it not just as a party, but as a declaration. It was a carefully constructed argument in favor of my own existence. For years, my life had been something that happened elsewhere, in another city, spoken of in vague, dismissive terms. My family saw my job as a hobby, my condo as a lucky break, and my independence as a strange, slightly cold character flaw. Tonight, I was going to bring my world to them. I was going to sit them down in the heart of it and force them to look. I chose Alinea's Seattle outpost for a reason. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was an experience. It was a symbol of a world they didn't have access to. A world I had gained access to through my own relentless effort. The reservation alone had required weeks of planning. Securing the private dining room, the gallery, felt like a victory in itself. It was intimate, beautiful, and undeniably impressive. There would be no denying the reality of my success when it was surrounding them in the form of handcrafted cocktails, Michelin-starred food, and impeccable service. This wasn't about showing off. It was about translation. They didn't understand the language of late-night coding sessions, of quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. But they would understand this. They would understand the weight of a heavy linen napkin in their lap, the taste of champagne that cost more than their weekly grocery bill. This I hoped, was a language that could not be misinterpreted. This was a plea served on a silver platter. See me. See what I have built. See that I am not just a walking, talking ATM. I am a person, and this is my life. Please finally be proud of me. Every detail was a calculated move in this emotional campaign. I curated the guest list carefully. There were my two closest friends, Jenna and Eli, who had been my rocks for over a decade. There were a few trusted colleagues, people whose opinions I valued and whose presence would lend a professional legitimacy to the evening. They were the jury. My family, my mother, Brittany, and Kayla were the ones on trial, though they didn't know it. I knew getting them to come from Tacoma would be the first hurdle. It wasn't far, less than an hour's drive. But in my family's world, it was an epic journey that required weeks of psychological preparation and would be wielded as a massive favor they were doing for me. Excuses were their native tongue. The traffic will be terrible. It's a weeknight. Asco. We're just so tired. Lauren. What's? To erase any possible excuse, I hired a private car service. A sleek black Lincoln Navigator would pick them up from their doorstep and deliver them to the restaurant. It would be waiting to take them home whenever they were ready. There would be no talk of gas money. No arguments about who would drive. No complaints about parking. I was removing every obstacle, sanding down every rough edge, trying to create a perfectly smooth path for them to walk into my world and for once be happy for me. The day of the dinner, I left work early. I spent 2 hours getting ready. I laid out the cream silk gown, a dress I bought specifically for this night. It was more than a dress. It was a costume for the version of myself I wanted them to see: elegant, successful, and serene. As I did my makeup, I rehearsed conversations in my head. I imagined my mother looking around the room, her eyes wide with genuine admiration, and saying, "Lauren, this is incredible. You've done so well for yourself. Ever." I pictured Brittany, perhaps humbled by the sheer opulence, offering a rare, sincere smile. "Happy birthday, sis. You deserve this." I have. I even held on to the faint hope that Kayla, my teenage niece, might look up from her phone and see me as something more than the aunt who paid her bills. This hope was a fragile, fluttering thing in my chest. It felt almost foolish, like a child still believing in Santa Claus despite all evidence to the contrary. But I couldn't help it. It was my birthday. After all, a day for wishes. And my only wish, the one I'd been making silently every year for as long as I could remember, was for my family to see me. Really. Truly see me. This dinner wasn't just a celebration. It was my last, most extravagant attempt to make that wish come true. They were 45 minutes late. I knew they would be. Punctuality was a courtesy, and courtesy was something you extended to people you respected. For me, they operated on what my mother called Brittany time. It's not again. Still, for 45 agonizing minutes, that foolish, fluttering hope in my chest beat its wings raw. I kept my smile fixed, assuring my friends they were just stuck in traffic. I made small talk with my colleagues, my mind replaying the polite but firm directions I had given the car service. With every passing minute, the knot in my stomach tightened. Hope began to curdle into the familiar sour taste of resignation. When they finally swept in, it was with an air of aggrieved royalty. My mother led the way, her face set in a look of strained tolerance. Brittany followed, her eyes immediately scanning the room with a cynical, dismissive gaze. Kayla trailed behind them, already absorbed in her phone, as if the entire evening were a massive imposition on her time. "We're here," my mother announced, her voice carrying a hint of accusation, as if their lateness was somehow my fault. The traffic was just a nightmare, I found. I stood up to greet them, the silk of my gown rustling. "I'm so glad you could make it. It's no to." I hugged my mother, her body stiff and unyielding in my arms. When I moved to hug Brittany, she turned her shoulder slightly, offering a limp, dismissive embrace that lasted less than a second. Kayla gave me a one-armed hug without looking up from her screen. The chill they brought with them seemed to lower the temperature in the room. I introduced them to my friends and colleagues. My mother was politely distant. Brittany offered limp handshakes and mumbled hellos, her gaze sweeping over my friends' outfits with barely concealed judgment. "You didn't need to make such a spectacle, Lauren," my mother muttered under her breath as I led her to her seat. The word spectacle landed like a stone in my gut. This beautiful evening, this heartfelt offering, was just a vulgar display in her eyes. The meal was an exercise in tension. My friends tried their best to draw my family into the conversation, asking them about their lives in Tacoma, about their jobs, about Kayla's school. The answers were clipped and unenthusiastic. Brittany rolled her eyes at the chandeliers. "It's a bit much, don't you think?" she said loudly to no one in particular. When the waiter described the first course with poetic detail, she smirked. Kayla scrolled through her phone the entire time. The frantic tapping of her thumbs, the only contribution she made to the evening. I felt myself shrinking with every passing moment. The confident, the successful woman who had walked into the restaurant was slowly being replaced by the invisible daughter. The girl who was always trying too hard and never getting it right. I could feel the pity in my friends' eyes as they watched the family dynamic play out in real time. But the final, irreversible break came mid-meal. The main courses had been served. Seared scallops for me. A filet mignon for Brittany. I was trying to engage my colleague David in a story about a recent project, desperately trying to maintain a facade of normalcy. That's when Brittany pushed her chair back, the sound scraping harshly against the wood floor. She picked up her plate and walked toward me. The entire table fell silent. It was happening again, that strange. Cold focus in her eyes that always preceded an act of casual destruction. My heart began to pound. A frantic drum against my ribs. She leaned in close. The smell of her cheap perfume mingling with the rich aroma of the food. Her voice was a low, conspiratorial sneer meant for the whole table to hear. You know, you sit here in your fancy dress in your fancy restaurant, pretending you're so much better than us. My blood ran cold. I could only stare at her, speechless. And then she tilted the plate. I watched it happen as if in slow motion. The clump of half-eaten steak, the smear of brown sauce, the soggy napkin. It all slid off the fine china and onto the pristine cream silk of my gown, landing with a sickening wet slap. The stain spread instantly. A hideous, obscene mark on the symbol of my hope. "Now you look like a garbage can," she said, her voice ringing with triumph. The silence that followed was absolute. No one breathed. No one moved. My friends stared, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. David looked like he wanted to physically intervene, but was frozen in shock. I looked to my mother, my last desperate appeal. I needed her to be a mother. I needed her to stand up, to gasp, to reprimand Brittany, to show 1 ounce of maternal protection. Instead, she let out a long, weary sigh. She didn't look at me, covered in food. She looked at Brittany. "Oh, Brittany," she said, her tone not angry, but exasperated and strangely apologetic. She turned her gaze to the rest of the table, offering a weak, placating smile. "Please forgive her. She's just uncomfortable with fancy things. She doesn't know how to act." She was making excuses for her. At that moment, she was managing Brittany's feelings while I sat there, publicly humiliated, wearing the remnants of her dinner as a badge of my own foolishness. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I did what I had always done. I smiled. It was a mechanical, hollow thing, a rictus of a grin that didn't reach my eyes. I picked up my napkin, the clean one, and dabbed uselessly at the stain. "It's fine," I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and strange. "It's just a dress." It was wife. But it wasn't just a dress. And inside, I was not fine. Something deep within me, the part that had kept hoping and trying and paying for their love, didn't just break. It turned to dust. It was over. The plea had been made, and their answer had been delivered, smeared in steak sauce all over my heart. The rest of the evening was a blur. My friends, bless them, rallied around me, creating a protective buffer of conversation that excluded my family. They talked about work, about movies, About anything and everything. Their words a desperate attempt to stitch the gaping wound in the atmosphere. The cake came out. I blew out the candles and made a wish that was no longer for their love, but for my own freedom. The car service was called. My mother, sister, and niece left without another word to me. Their silence a final, damning statement. My friend Jenna drove me home. She didn't say much, just placed a comforting hand on my arm. The silence in her car was a balm, a stark contrast to the roaring emptiness that had filled the restaurant. Back in my condo, the silence was different. It was heavy, suffocating. I didn't turn on all the lights, preferring the shadows. I walked to my bedroom and took off the ruined gown. The silk was cold and sticky. The smell of steak and old lemon clung to it. Instead of throwing it in a heap on the floor, I did something strange. I draped it carefully over the back of a velvet armchair that sat in the corner, spreading the stained skirt out like a museum piece. It was evidence. Exhibit A. I needed to look at it. For an hour, I just sat on my bed staring at the dress. The stain was the focal point. A dark, ugly map of my own delusion. Then, with a strange sense of calm, I stood up, walked to my office, and opened my laptop. The screen cast a cool blue light across my face. I didn't check my email. I didn't browse the internet. I opened a single file, one I hadn't looked at in months, but updated with grim regularity. It was a simple spreadsheet, password protected. I named it Family. Quote, for years, I had meticulously tracked every emergency payment, every loan that was never meant to be repaid. I had told myself it was for budgeting, for financial planning, but that was a lie. It was a record of my own quiet suffering. The first tab was labeled Brittany. I started scrolling. The entries went back 5 years. $500. Emergency root canal. I remembered the frantic, tearful call, and later, seeing pictures of her on a weekend trip to Portland that same week. $1,200. Rent deposit for the apartment she'd be evicted from 6 months later. $350. Car repair. $200. Groceries. The list went on and on. Small bites. Large chunks. A relentless draining of my resources. I clicked on the cell at the bottom of the column. The formula calculated the sum instantly. In 5 years, I had transferred $47,000 directly to my sister's bank account. I clicked on the next tab. Kayla. This one was even more sickening. It started with smaller things, dance classes, school trips, but it grew exponentially. $500. Orthodontist copay. $200. Summer camp. And then the big one, $30,000. Car. 2022 Honda Civic. It was a car for her 16th birthday. A safe, reliable car for school rides. My mother had insisted. Brittany couldn't afford it. Of course. So, I had bought it. The car was registered in my name. The insurance paid from my account. It was Kayla's car in every way except legally. Legally, it was mine. The third tab was MISC. This was a collection of all the other drains. Spa trips for my mother and Brittany that I was guilted into paying for. Shopping sprees on credit cards I'd foolishly added Brittany as an authorized user on. Plane tickets for family vacations I didn't even go on because I had to work. I added it all up. The transfers. The car. The credit card debt. The miscellaneous bleeding. The grand total stared back at me from the screen. A cold, hard number that felt both obscene and clarifying. $115,000. $115,000. I leaned back in my chair, the breath leaving my body in a slow, painful hiss. Each entry on that spreadsheet wasn't just a number. It was a moment of weakness. A moment I chose to buy peace instead of demanding respect. I had been funding their lives, enabling Brittany's irresponsibility and my mother's refusal to hold her accountable. I wasn't helping. I was paying for a subscription to a family that treated me like an inconvenience. I thought about the car. The word my mother had used over and over to convince me was safety. It's about Kayla's safety. Lauren, you want her to be safe, don't you? The word echoed in my quiet office. Safety. I had given them a car for safety. I had given them money for security. I had given them everything they asked for so that I could feel safe from the arguments, the guilt, the drama, the cold disappointment. I looked at the car keys hanging on a hook by my door. My spare set for the Honda Civic. My name was on the title. My money had paid for it. I looked back at the stained dress, still slumped in the chair in the other room. I had been buying their version of safety, but it had never made me feel safe. It had only made me a target. I whispered the word out loud to the empty room, tasting the irony on my tongue. Safety. Right? That word no longer meant what it used to. Love wasn't about keeping others comfortable at your own expense. And safety wasn't about avoiding conflict. True safety, I was beginning to realize, was about drawing a line. It was about protecting yourself, even if it meant from your own family. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to build a wall. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark of my living room, the city lights of Seattle glittering like cold, distant stars, and I watched the dawn creep over the Cascades. The sky turned from inky black to a bruised purple, then to a soft, forgiving gray. But I felt no forgiveness. My mind was a turbulent sea of replays, the tilt of the plate, the sneer on Brittany's face, my mother's sigh of resignation. The stained dress was still draped over the armchair. A silent, ghostly witness in the corner of the room. I felt hollowed out, scoured clean of the naive hope that had fueled me for 3 decades. My phone, lying face down on the coffee table, had been silent all night. I expected a call, perhaps a performative, guilt-driven apology from my mother, or even a gloating text from Brittany, but there was nothing. The silence was, in its own way, an answer. They had done what they'd done, and in their minds, it was over. I was expected to absorb it, clean it up, and send money when the next crisis inevitably hit. It was just after sunrise when the phone finally buzzed. The vibration was violent against the quiet surface of the table. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the screen. It was a notification from Instagram. A part of me, the part that was still a glutton for punishment, opened the app. And that's when the second, far more vicious blow landed. It was a post from Kayla, my niece. The picture was of my dress. It must have been taken at the dinner, a sneaky downward shot from her phone while I was still sitting there in shock. The lighting was harsh, making the cream silk look cheap and yellowed. The steak sauce stain was the star of the show. A dark, chaotic splatter that looked even more vulgar in the pixelated glare of a phone screen. It was a picture designed for maximum humiliation, but the image was nothing compared to the caption. The words were small and black against the white screen, but they screamed at me. When rich auntie tries too hard, guess the trash finally matches the outfit. I read it once, then twice. My brain struggled to process the cruelty. Rich auntie. Not Aunt Lauren. Not family. A caricature. A role she had assigned me. A walking wallet who was trying too hard to belong. The casual, dismissive cruelty of it took my breath away. It was the kind of thing a bully writes. Someone who feels powerful by making someone else feel small. This was my niece, the girl whose crooked teeth I had paid to straighten, whose feet I had put shoes on, whose future I had worried over. Then I saw what was underneath the caption. A string of comments had already started to appear from her high school friends. Lol. Savage. Code. Oh my god. But it was the first comment that made the blood freeze in my veins. It was from Brittany. It wasn't words. It was just 3 laughing, crying emojis, glowing, bright, and cheerful on the screen. That was it. That was her response. Laughter. Public. Documented. Gleeful laughter at my expense. The pain was a physical thing. It wasn't the sharp sting of the night before. This was a deep, crushing weight. A pressure in my chest that made it hard to breathe. The incident at the restaurant was an act of personal malice contained within those four walls. This was a public execution. They had taken my lowest moment, packaged it for mass consumption, and served it up to their friends for a laugh. It wasn't a family dispute anymore. It was mockery. It was a declaration that I was not one of them. I was the joke. I was the other. I sank back into the couch, the phone heavy in my hand. I thought of the spreadsheet. I thought of the $115,000. I thought of the car, the safe and reliable car I had bought for Kayla. The car she was probably driving to school at that very moment, feeling cool and popular after posting that picture. My generosity had not only been unappreciated, it had been weaponized. It had been twisted into a narrative where I was a pathetic, try-hard social climber, and they were the cool, authentic ones who were right to tear me down. The humiliation from the night before had been about them showing me I wasn't good enough for them. This post was about them showing the world I was a joke. And as I stared at Brittany's laughing emojis, something inside me finally went cold and quiet. The hurt was still there, a massive, gaping wound. But beneath it, a new feeling was hardening like steel. It was resolve. The tears that had threatened all night finally dried up. The shaking in my hands stopped. I put the phone down and stood up. I walked over to the armchair and looked at the dress. I saw it clearly now, not as a symbol of my humiliation, but as a symbol of my liberation. It was the price of my freedom. I had paid it in full. I had spent my entire life buying their affection, their tolerance, their temporary peace. I had paid for their love with my time, my energy, and a staggering amount of my money. And in return, they gave me trash on a dress and emojis on a screen. The transaction was complete, and it was the last one I would ever make. I walked back to the coffee table, picked up my phone, and whispered to the quiet apartment. I'm done. I'm done buying love. I guessed. The decision, once it was made, was followed by a strange and profound calm. The storm of emotion had passed, leaving behind a clear, cold, and quiet landscape. There was no anger, no need for screaming matches. Revenge, I realized, was a hot, messy, emotional act. What I was about to do was not revenge. It was a correction. It was balancing the books. I spent the first hour of the morning not on the phone with my family, but on my laptop and with my bank. My fingers moved with a steady, deliberate purpose. The first call was to my credit card company. I navigated the automated menu, my voice even and calm when the representative finally answered. Hello, I said. I'd like to remove an authorized user from my account. Today. I gave them Brittany's name, spelled it out for them, and confirmed her date of birth from memory. Yes, that's correct. Effective immediately. If fix. The woman on the other end was polite and efficient. There was no drama. Just a few clicks of a keyboard on her end, and a financial lifeline that Brittany had taken for granted for 8 years was severed. The card in her wallet was now just a useless piece of plastic. Next, I logged into my online banking portal. I went to the bill pay section, to the tab labeled Recurring Transfers. I do. There they were, lined up like little soldiers of my own making. One for Brittany's cell phone bill. Another a monthly allowance I sent to help with her and Kayla's expenses. I had set them up years ago to make things easier for them. Not for me. I clicked the box next to each one. A prompt appeared on the screen. Are you sure you want to delete this scheduled transfer? I clicked Confirm without a moment's hesitation. The entries vanished from the screen. My third step was an email to my financial advisor. Monica. Monica was a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had been gently questioning my family-related expenditures for years. My email was short and to the point. Subject: Reclaiming Assets. Hi, Monica. I need to begin the process of reclaiming a vehicle currently in use by a family member. It is a 2022 Honda Civic registered and titled solely in my name. Please advise on the most efficient and legally sound way to take possession of the vehicle as soon as possible. All financial support to this branch of my family has now ceased. Let's discuss at your earliest convenience. Thanks. Lauren. Her reply came in under 10 minutes. Lauren. Good to hear. I have a firm I work with. Let's talk. The phone call with Monica was liberating. She didn't ask for the emotional backstory. She just saw the numbers. The legal documents. She saw it as a straightforward business transaction, which is exactly what it now was. She confirmed my sole ownership of the car and explained that a simple towing order was all that was required. It was clean. It was legal. It was mine. By 10 a.m. I had contacted the towing company Monica recommended. I gave them the address of Kayla's high school, the make, model, and license plate of the car. I emailed them a copy of the title and my driver's license. The dispatcher was professional and discreet. We can have it picked up within the hour, he said. Where would you like it delivered? I gave him the address of a secure long-term parking garage near my condo. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of suspended animation. I made coffee. I showered. I put on a simple pair of jeans and a sweater. I did not look at my phone. I knew it was only a matter of time. At 12:15 p.m., the call came. The caller ID flashed. Kayla. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and answered. The sound that came through the speaker was not a voice, but a raw, hysterical shriek. My car is gone. Someone stole my car. I held the phone slightly away from my ear. I did not raise my voice. I spoke into the storm of her panic with a quiet calm that felt utterly foreign and incredibly powerful. It wasn't stolen. Kayla. It's 7. There was a pause. A moment of confusion in her panicked sobs. What? What are you talking about? It's gone. I came out for lunch and it's gone. I called the police. You can hang up with the police, I said, my voice still level. It wasn't stolen. It was repossessed. Another pause. The word hung in the air between us. Repossessed? What do you mean? I didn't miss any payments. You're right, I said. You've never made a payment. I did. And I stopped. 2-3. The realization began to dawn, and her hysteria quickly curdled into indignant rage. You took my car? You can't do that. That's my car. No, Kayla, I said. And for the first time in my life, I spoke a hard truth to her without apology or equivocation. It was never your car. It was mine. My name is on the title. My money paid for it. You were just borrowing it. In furs. I paused, letting the words sink in. And that loan is over now. But why? She stammered. The tears now sounding less like panic and more like the frustration of a child who'd had her favorite toy taken away. My post? You're doing this over a stupid Instagram post? No, I said calmly. I'm doing this because of what the post represented. You don't get to take my money and then publicly mock me. That's not how relationships work. Not anymore. Turner men. She started to cry again. But this time it was a sputtering, angry sound. You're ruining my life. How am I supposed to get to school? To my job? I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said. It wasn't cruel. It was a statement of fact. And with that, I said, goodbye, Kayla. Experiat. And I ended the call. I placed the phone back on the table. My hand was perfectly steady. The power reversal was complete. It hadn't happened in a shouting match or a dramatic confrontation. It had happened with a few clicks, a few phone calls, and one quiet, honest conversation. I had taken my power back. Not by force, but by simply reclaiming what was already mine. It took them 2 hours and 45 minutes to get to my door. I imagine it was a frantic, chaotic journey from Tacoma. Likely in Brittany's beat-up old sedan that was, I knew, perpetually low on gas. I used the time to prepare. Not for a fight, but for a final meeting of shareholders in a company that had just been dissolved. My coffee table, usually home to art books and a single white orchid, was now bare. except for 3 thick black binders. I had spent the afternoon printing documents. Each binder was neatly labeled, one for Brittany, one for Kayla, and one for the miscellaneous expenses my mother had guilted me into. Inside were 5 years of bank statements with every transfer highlighted in yellow. Credit card statements with Brittany's frivolous purchases circled in red. Receipts for tuition, for orthodontia, for summer camps. And on the very top of the pile, I placed a single, freshly printed sheet of paper, a high-quality screenshot of Kayla's Instagram post. Brittany's laughing emojis glowing like toxic little buttons. When the pounding on my door started, it was just as furious as I expected. I didn't rush. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. They stood there like a united front of rage. Brittany's face was blotchy and red. Her eyes narrowed to slits. Kayla was behind her, her arms crossed, her face a mask of tear-streaked defiance. My mother stood slightly to the side, her expression a familiar, crumpled mess of anxiety and disappointment, aimed as always at me for causing this disturbance. "What the hell did you do?" Brittany spat, pushing past me into my apartment. Kayla and my mother followed, a storm of negative energy flooding my quiet space. "You couldn't just call?" my mother pleaded, her voice trembling. "You had to humiliate your niece in front of her entire school?" "Humiliate her?" I asked, closing the door softly. I walked over to the coffee table and stood behind it. It felt like a barricade. That's an interesting choice of words. Oozed. Brittany started pacing my living room like a caged animal. "This is insane." Lauren. Taking Kayla's car. Canceling my card. "What is wrong with you? Is this because of your stupid birthday party? Because I hurt your feelings?" "This isn't about my feelings," I said, my voice so calm it seemed to unnerve them. "This is about facts. Please sit down." 8. They remained standing. A hostile tribunal. I gestured to the binders. "I've prepared some documents for you." I thought it was time we all got on the same page about our financial relationship. Days denied. I opened the first binder, the one with Brittany's name on it. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke like I was delivering a presentation at work. "Brittany, over the past 5 years, I have transferred $47,000 to you for various emergencies. I've also paid approximately $12,000 in debt on a credit card you used for non-essential purchases like weekend trips, clothing, and salon visits. Brittany scoffed. "You offered. You have all this money. It's nothing to you." "It's Jude." "It's not nothing to me," I replied evenly, turning a page. "Kayla, the car I purchased for your safety cost $30,000, plus insurance and registration fees. Your orthodontia, summer camps, and private lessons total an additional $16,000. I looked at my mother. "And Mom, the spa trips, the loans to fix your house, the vacations I paid for so you and Brittany could get away, that's another $10,000. I finally looked up from the pages, making eye contact with each of them. "This is 5 years of my help," I said, my voice clear and steady. $115,000. That is the financial reality of our family. Oh. I let the number hang in the air. The silence was thick with it. Kayla wouldn't look at me. My mother stared at the floor. Only Brittany held my gaze, her own filled with pure venom. Then I picked up the screenshot of the Instagram post and slid it across the coffee table toward them. "And this?" I said, my voice dropping slightly, "is how you thanked me." "I?" My mother flinched when she saw it. Kayla's defiant expression finally cracked, replaced by a flicker of shame. Brittany just glanced at it. "Oh. Grow up. Lauren. It was a joke." "A joke that you co-signed with laughing emojis," I countered. "A joke that you posted for the world to see using the girl who was driving a car I paid for. A joke that was meant to hurt and humiliate me after I spent thousands on a dinner meant to celebrate with you. Thank you." The accusations started then. The final, desperate volley of their defense. They called me cold. They called me ungrateful, though for what I couldn't imagine. They called me dramatic and told me I was tearing the family apart over money. They used every weapon in their arsenal of guilt and manipulation. I just stood there and let them exhaust themselves. When they finally ran out of steam, the room was quiet again. "I'm not tearing the family apart," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I'm just refusing to be its bank. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm not seeking revenge." Well, I looked at each of them, my gaze unwavering. "I'm just done being used. It's dawn." I walked to the door and opened it. "I think this meeting is over. It's time for you to leave." "Aya." They stared at me, shocked into silence by my finality. For the first time, they had no leverage, no angle to play. The power had shifted, and they knew it. Slowly, silently, they filed out of my apartment, leaving me alone with the binders, the truth, and the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful silence of my new life. The silence that followed their departure was absolute. For the first week, my phone didn't ring. No angry texts. No pleading voicemails from my mother. It was as if the branch of my family tree that had grown so twisted around me had been cleanly severed. The quiet was unsettling at first. It felt like holding my breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I went to work, saw my friends, went to the gym. I lived my life. But a part of my brain was always listening for the phantom limb, the familiar pull of their manufactured crisis. But the crisis never came. The silence stretched from 1 week into 2, then into a month. The quiet gradually transformed from something unnerving into something peaceful. I realized how much of my mental energy for my entire adult life had been consumed by them, anticipating their needs, bracing for their dramas, managing their emotions. Without that constant hum of anxiety in the background, my own life became sharper, more vibrant. The view from my condo seemed clearer. The coffee I drank in the morning tasted better. I was living entirely on my own terms, and it was intoxicating. The first ripple of change came not from a direct call, but through the family grapevine, a cousin I spoke to every few months. "Did you hear about Brittany?" she asked, her voice cautious. "She got a job. A real one. Full-time. As an office coordinator at a dental practice. Actually." I felt a jolt, but it wasn't of triumph or smug satisfaction. It was surprise. Genuine, unadulterated surprise. Brittany, who hadn't held a steady job in over a decade, had gone out and secured one with benefits. The instinct to call her to congratulate her rose in me, but I pushed it down. This was her victory, not mine. She had done it because she had to. My withdrawal of funds hadn't been a punishment. It had been the removal of a safety net she had been using as a hammock. For the first time, she was forced to stand on her own 2 feet. And apparently, she could. A few weeks after that, my phone buzzed with a text from an unexpected number. "Kayla." My heart hammered against my ribs. I braced myself for a wave of teenage vitriol. But the message was simple, devoid of emojis or attitude. "Got a job at the consignment shop downtown. Saving for a car." I stared at the text for a long time. She was working. She was saving. She was taking responsibility for her own wants and needs. The spoiled, entitled girl who had mocked me online was being replaced by a young woman who was learning the value of $1 because she was finally earning one. I thought carefully about my reply. A single smug word could undo whatever fragile progress she was making. A lecture would be tuned out. I settled on 2 words, sent with a sincerity that surprised even me. "Proud of you." The 3 dots indicating she was typing appeared, then vanished. She didn't reply, but it didn't matter. The message had been sent, and I hoped received in the spirit it was intended. The most profound change, however, was in my mother. Our weekly calls, which had been on hiatus since the confrontation, slowly resumed. At first, they were stilted and awkward, but the usual agenda, a long, sighing list of Brittany's problems, ending with a not-so-subtle request for my help, was gone. In its place, a hesitant curiosity began to grow. "How was your week at work, Lauren?" she asked one Sunday. And the question was so genuine it almost knocked me over. I told her about a challenging project, about a difficult client, and she listened. She asked follow-up questions. She didn't pivot the conversation back to Brittany. We talked. For the first time in what felt like forever. Like two adults. I learned that, without my constant financial intervention, she and Brittany had been forced to rely on each other in new ways. They were budgeting. They were making meal plans. Brittany was complaining about her boss. But she wasn't quitting. Kayla was taking the bus to school in her job. And while she hated it, she was doing it. The family that had once taken me for granted, that had outsourced all its responsibilities to me, was finally learning the hard, necessary art of self-reliance. I hadn't destroyed them by saying no. I had inadvertently given them the one thing my money could never buy, a chance to grow up. The consequences of my actions were not the fiery ruin I had braced myself for, but the quiet, slow, and steady growth of new roots. A year clicked by, measured not in dramatic events, but in small, consistent changes. The story of my 35th birthday was written in a language completely different from the year before. There was no private room at a Michelin-starred restaurant. There was no cream silk gown. There was no desperate, aching need to be seen. Instead, there was a drive to my mother's house in Tacoma. The sky was a classic Pacific Northwest gray, but it felt peaceful, not oppressive. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't rehearsing conversations or steeling myself for insults. I was just a daughter going to her mother's house for dinner. The house itself felt different. It was tidier. The air of quiet chaos had been replaced by a sense of calm order. The smell of roast chicken and rosemary filled the small kitchen. My mother greeted me at the door with a hug. And this time, it was warm and real. Brittany was at the stove, wrestling with a pan of gravy, a smudge of flour on her cheek. She looked tired from work, but it was a good kind of tired. She smiled at me, a real smile, not a smirk. "Hey," she said. "Happy birthday." Dinner was simple. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. We sat around the small kitchen table, the same one I'd done my homework at as a child. The conversation flowed easily. Kayla talked animatedly about her job at the consignment shop, about the vintage designer bags she sometimes got to price, and how she was only a few hundred away from having a down payment for a used car. Brittany complained good-naturedly about her boss, but also talked with pride about a new organizational system she had implemented at the office. My mother listened to them both, but her gaze kept coming back to me. Her eyes were filled with a quiet respect I had never seen there before. After we ate, Kayla handed me a slightly crumpled envelope with a handwritten card inside. "It's not much," she said, her cheeks flushing a little. "But I wanted to give you something." Inside the card, tucked next to a drawing of a lopsided birthday cake, were 2 crisp $100 bills. "It's not much. $200 I saved. But I wanted to give back." I looked at the money, then at my niece's earnest, hopeful face. It was the most valuable gift I had ever received. It wasn't a payment. It was an acknowledgement. It was respect, earned by both of us. I felt a lump form in my throat. "Thank you, Kayla," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "This means the world to me. Brittany's gift was a cookbook focused on simple weeknight meals. I figured since I'm actually cooking now, maybe we could, do it together sometime," she mumbled, looking at the floor. It was her version of an olive branch, a clumsy but sincere offering of a different kind of future for us. But it was my mother's toast that healed the last of the old wounds. She raised her water glass, her hand trembling just a little. She looked directly at me. "To Lauren," she said, her voice clear and strong, "for showing us that love and strength can live together. We all clinked glasses. In that small, quiet moment, I looked at the faces of these women, my mother, my sister, my niece. They were flawed and complicated, as was I, but they were trying. The dynamic of entitlement and resentment had been replaced by a fragile but growing ecosystem of mutual respect and responsibility. I smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached all the way to my soul. I realized I hadn't lost my family. I had saved them and myself from the people we used to be. By stopping the cycle of enabling, by refusing to be their safety net, and by finally, bravely choosing myself, I hadn't been left with nothing. I had finally earned what I'd been chasing all along. Not their dependence, not their gratitude, their respect. And in the quiet warmth of my mother's kitchen, that felt like enough. I prefer this response.